Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Mitchell, and I'm an assistant professor of graphic design in the School of Design at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And my presentation is Shifting Student Perceptions Through Intergenerational Co-Design. Today, I'll be sharing a project from my junior level graphic design research course. This course introduces students to both quantitative and qualitative research methods and is often the first time students are asked to engage directly with research participants rather than designing for hypothetical audiences. One of the goals of the course was to help students understand that research is an active part of the entire design process. By gathering information, building relationships, asking questions, analyzing those findings, and using insights to inform their decisions. But a second goal of the course was to challenge age bias. My own research sits at the intersection of graphic design and gerontology, or the study of aging. And through this work, I've become increasingly interested in the ways that age-related bias shapes design decisions. Much of the world continues to view aging through a lens of decline, limitation, and loss, and as a result, it shows up unintentionally within our designs. Older adults are often excluded from design processes or represented through stereotypes that fail to capture the complexity of their lives. I have witnessed the power of intergenerational programs through conferences, research collaborations, and community partnerships. Again and again, I saw evidence that meaningful interactions between generations can challenge assumptions and create opportunities for learning that will not happen otherwise. And for years, I've wanted to bring those experiences into my classroom. So, the opportunity that I'm sharing today emerged through a partnership with the John T. O'Connor Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was also inspired around the same time by a project that was developed at Kent State University, and I had the opportunity to speak with faculty member Jess Barnes about how their model worked. And those conversations helped me envision what a similar experience might look like within the graphic design curriculum at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So one recommendation that came from those decisions was or discussions was to partner with a gerontology expert outside of my own expertise. And I was fortunate to collaborate with Dr. Lizzie Boland, Associate Professor of Social Work and Director of Gerontology Certificate Program at the University of Tennessee. And together, both Dr. Boland and I designed an experience that would move beyond simply learning about older adults and instead allow students to build relationships with them directly. So, one of the skills that we wanted our students to develop was also confidence in conducting interviews. Many design students identify as introverts, and the idea of calling a stranger, asking questions, and sustaining a meaningful conversation could feel quite intimidating. So, before the students even participated in this project, we spent a lot of time discussing age-related bias, interview techniques, qualitative research methods, and strategies for asking thoughtful questions. Each student was charged with being partnered with one older adult and spent the next 6 to 8 weeks calling them and interviewing them, hearing their stories. And as an end result for them, it was to create something in response to what they had heard. And that response was extremely open-ended in terms of what that may be. Before the project began, I administered the pre-project survey. I was really curious about their comfort levels working with older adults and doing a project like this. And the first question I asked was, what comes to mind when you hear the word older adult? And these are just some of the words that we kind of saw across the board with these pre project surveys. So kind of a wide range of words here. Another question that we were interested in is how often they interacted with people over the age of 65. And you can see, again, it's kind of a wider range. We had 16 total students. Some interacted with them often, but again, it was more in the sometimes and rarely range. And the last question we asked was, how comfortable are you interacting with an older adult? And you can see here it's kind of spanning across the entire, from not at all to very comfortable. So, after recruiting participants through the John T. O'Connor Senior Center, I began having individual conversations with each person who expressed interest in participating. And before beginning, I wanted them to feel completely confident going in that they knew what to expect. These were individuals who had served in the military, traveled internationally, raised families, started businesses, volunteered in their communities. They performed music, taught classes, and they developed incredible expertise over the course of their lives. And during these intake conversations, I was also gathering information about their interests, hobbies, communication preferences, and personalities. And at that same time, I was having students do the same thing. I was looking at their interests, expectations, and communication preferences. And rather than assigning the partners randomly, I try to make thoughtful matches whenever possible. So if a student loved music, I try to connect them to somebody who had a background in music. If a student had interest in travel, I looked for someone who shared that interest. My hope was that even small points of connections would help those initial conversations feel more comfortable and meaningful. And while these matches were being made, students were preparing for their first interviews. So this is when Dr. Boland came in for the first few weeks of the project. And she came in and discussed interviewing strategies and age bias related things, and also discussed like just how to ask good questions. And during this time, Dr. Boland and I both modeled an interview in front of the class on kind of a whim decision, which meant we were not prepared at all. And the interview was kind of intentionally imperfect. In fact, it became very awkward very quickly. It turned out to be one of the really most valuable lessons, though. Students immediately recognized the importance of preparing for an interview, active listening, and asking questions that invite meaningful stories rather than one-word answers, which is what was happening during our modeling exercise. Dr. Boland worked extensively with students on qualitative interviewing techniques and active listening and age-related bias, and we discussed language choices and assumptions that people often make about aging and strategies for creating conversations that felt more respectful and authentic. Students realized that conducting an interview is much more difficult than it appears. Asking thoughtful questions, listening carefully, and knowing when to follow up, and all require a lot of practice. So once the partnerships were established, they met with their older adult partners throughout the semester and through telephone conversations, and that was really what was recommended. There was flexibility based on participants' comfort levels. Some participants met via FaceTime, and others chose to meet in person at the O'Connor Center. So while they were meeting with their partners in the beginning, we started to talk about qualitative data analysis. And to model this, we ended up using the anonymous pre-project questionnaire responses that were collected before the project began. And we asked students to identify patterns, themes, and insights. And one of the more interesting moments that occurred when these different groups kind of analyzed the same exact data set, we noticed that they arrived at different conclusions. So this kind of became a powerful lesson in how we interpret and how meaning making is made. Students began to understand the qualitative research is not just collecting stories, but it's about identifying patterns, recognizing nuances, and constructing understanding from complex human experiences. So each, like, basically what we were kind of looking at was like what were the outcomes for this or expectations for this beyond just interviewing. We had weekly design responses. There was a final deliverable, which I'll share with you, that was then placed into an exhibit. So they were designing an exhibit experience as well as kind of this cumulative book that everybody would be getting. So each week, students reflected on what they learned throughout a series of design responses, which is like what we call the weekly design responses. They were intentionally open-ended. I didn't want every student producing the same outcome. Instead, I really wanted them to explore kind of different meaningful, contexts in terms of what was happening within their individual relationships. So response one was called To Connect. And this week marks their first conversation with their older adult partner, and their task was to capture or create a zine that captures the experience of their initial connection. So the zine was kind of a visual diary of sorts, an opportunity to process and translate what it felt like to meet and listen and begin forming a relationship with somebody. So the zine should communicate the essence of that first exchange and what connections they were sharing with each other. It could be a moment of connection or a surprise that happened, something of curiosity. It could be the emotions that they and their partner were feeling that shaped the conversation. They could include things like what they learned about their partner, and what they also shared about themselves. So in this particular zine, there was a conversation between the younger students, the college-age students who felt that they were very spontaneous. However, their partner was also very spontaneous and traveled internationally quite a bit, realizing through their connections and conversations that the student was really not quite spontaneous at all, didn't even have a driver's license. And so they had a laughing joke about that. Another example here of just a couple other zines and kind of what their outputs were. Response two, so this week they returned to the conversations with their older adult partner and they selected a direct quote that they felt was important, something that was memorable or moving or meaningful to them. And their task was to create a typographic dominant poster that honors their partner's words by visually interpreting both the quote and the essence of who they're learning about. So the poster needed to communicate like the tone, feeling, and presence of their partner's voice. And this could, like, the direct quote could be a piece of wisdom, it could be something that was humorous that was said, or maybe a reflection that stood out to them, or a phrase that captures their personality or perspective. So in terms of the design of it, I told them they could draw on things like objects or textures or habits that they feel significant to them that their partner projected, or the way they spoke or carried themselves, or the way they shared their stories. And so I gave them a final output of like what the size could be for the posters, but you can see there's kind of a wide range of output between kind of what was said for these here, which was really great to see. And their last response three, is to remember. And this final response invited students to preserve a story that their partner shared with them from their past. And they'll select a story and they were to illustrate 5 objects that represent the key details. And each object initially was going to be a GIF. We found out that that just was not, there was just not enough time in terms of creating a GIF for this. And so it just became a standalone icon set. But the set could be like a childhood memory, a tradition, or a holiday. It could be a favorite job, a hobby, or pastime, a specific event, place, or milestone. So again, kind of going back to what response two was, is they could draw inspiration from objects, textures, or habits they saw from their partner, or the way they spoke or carried themselves. Or some of them were meeting face to face at this point. And so if like they were, seeing, interesting clothing, that the choices that they were wearing, they could actually develop the systems based off of kind of those things as well. So what was interesting with these responses was some students developed visual systems that evolved throughout the semester, and others experimented with new approaches every week. There was no single correct solution because of that, because each partnership was different. And throughout the semester, we wanted students to experience a broader community. Like we just felt like it was just a good idea for them to like kind of take away and interpret it on their own. So throughout the semester, we wanted students to experience a broader community surrounding this center. And so we did a few different types of activities. First began by doing some age-related kind of like simulation experiences like in the classroom. So as Dr. Boland was lecturing, students were wearing simulation equipment from the College of Nursing. So they were wearing headphones, or they may be wearing simulation glasses to simulate the different types of age-related things that happen as we get older. We also rented an aging suit, which I'll share with you in just a little bit, but we created multiple like simulation opportunities for them just to see that there's many different ways of, how our bodies change as we get older. So we visited the John T. O'Connor Center multiple times outside of the interviews, just first getting a walkthrough, kind of a tour of the center itself, seeing all the amazing, incredible things happening at the center because it's a really well um, populated center. There's many different events that are happening. We participated in exercise classes. We participated in social activities. We played games. We went to a few of their holiday events. One of the most memorable experiences for this was when students and I also believed that we would be going to a casual line dancing class. And instead, it turned out to be a surprisingly intense, it was called a SAIL, intense workout session. Students spent the following week talking about how sore they were. And I think moments like that really challenged assumptions that they held about older adults and aging itself. They realized, wow, they're still actively moving and doing just a ton of things. But playing games was so much fun, just getting to know each other in a lot of ways. So I had mentioned that we incorporated aging simulation activities into this, and so we rented this aging suit. It's an aging simulation suit from the College of Nursing, and the students were experiencing various sensory and mobility changes throughout the simulation. With different equipment that reflected on how those experiences might influence their design decisions as well. But importantly, we also emphasize that there's no single experience of aging. Dr. Boland introduced students to the concept of the go-go, um, the so-go, and the no-go phases of aging. Basically, the go-go are those that they were really partnered with. They were the people that were still actively doing amazing, incredible things in the community. The so-goes were those that were doing things, but they had some limitations. And the no-goes were those that, unfortunately, a lot of our stereotypes and biases kind of fall into, where their people just are not getting out into the community because they're just not able to. Um, but I think that one of the most powerful things too was that they realized that many of the participants were still highly active and deeply engaged in the community. They were traveling still, they volunteered currently. A lot of them were still teaching classes or performing music or participating in athletic events. And so it was just an incredible way for students to challenge them to move beyond thinking about just accessibility and accessibility is importantly as a checklist towards understanding older adults, but actually understanding that they have interests, aspirations, and expertise, and they are, they're human beings. So as the semester progressed, the project expanded beyond just these individual partnerships. So students began working collaboratively to plan an exhibition and publication that would celebrate the relationships and stories that emerged from the project. Here you can see a wide range of posters. And they designed a poster for each of the partnerships, and we hung these all around the college, and we also hung these posters all around the O'Connor Center, advertising for the exhibit that we'd be having at the end of the semester. And here we can see example or like just the exhibit itself. What was really interesting to me was the final outcomes were so remarkable. No two students created the same thing. I had students that designed interactive experiences, other students developed publications, students developed games, keepsakes, maps, illustrations, or objects that were just inspired by their conversations. A student created a matchbook series. Another student developed a telephone directory that was also an inspired publication. We had students that created coasters, painted objects, and storytelling artifacts that reflected the lives and interests of their partners. And I think what made the work especially interesting and compelling to me was that it was deeply personal. They weren't just designing for this hypothetical audience, but they were designing with and about somebody that they had become, had really come to know. The exhibit took place at the John T. O'Connor Center. And this was, for many, their first experience exhibiting work in a community setting outside of just our university classroom walls. The opening was one of the most rewarding moments of the semester. We had the news come and interview students and partners. Partners attended alongside friends and family members. Students proudly shared their projects, and some participants even brought gifts for their student partners, which was really sweet. Several students also chose to gift their final projects to the individuals who had inspired them. So I think that the exhibit really became much more than just a showcase of student work, but really a celebration of relationships. So at the conclusion of the project, students completed post project reflections and surveys. And I think some of the things that were kind of came from this is it has helped me think more about the deeper meaning of my design and how to represent someone's personality and how it would make them feel. I've learned that you can use your passions to help other people. She lived most of her life having unique opportunities because she always tried to say yes. This has taught me about the impact of my work. That I would create a relationship outside of this project was surprising to one student. And another person said that they were most surprised by the connections made between the partner and them. They related a lot more than they thought they would. And through this, some of the other like really impactful statements, this is from one student. Over the course of the semester, I learned that listening is more than simply hearing someone speak. It's a way of truly being present. And in listening, really listening, something shifted in me. I realized how rare it is to give someone your full attention with no expectation of what you'll get in return. The world doesn't often make space for that kind of care. And that's exactly what this project really meant to be. Also, like students reported changes into how they thought about aging. They expressed greater confidence in conducting interviews and engaging in qualitative research. And many described gaining a deeper appreciation for perspectives that they had never previously encountered. They developed a book, Stories That Connect Us, an intergenerational project. Each student had two spreads that they developed that about their partner that they shared. And again, this was very open-ended. Each person kind of interpreted it a little bit differently. But we printed enough copies that each participant, adult participant, older adult participant, received a book. And I thought that that was just really an incredible kind of gift for them for participating in this. The project did receive, or I received in teaching this project, a Breath of Fresh Air Faculty Innovator Award through the Teaching and Learning Innovation Center at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I think really more than anything, the most important thing that really came from this was some of the relationships continued long after the semester has have ended. Several students still meet very frequently with their partners. Some share meals together. Others remain in contact through phone calls and visits. So for me, these ongoing relationships represent the most meaningful outcome of this project. As designers, we often talk about empathy, inclusion, and human-centered design, but those concepts can often remain abstract until we create opportunities for this genuine connection. So the project demonstrated that intergenerational exchange can be powerful and educational, not only for improving research and design outcomes, but also challenging assumptions and building relationships and helping students recognize the value and dignity present across the lifespan. So moving forward, I plan to introduce exhibit planning earlier in the semester, reduce end of the semester workload overlap, and continue refining the structure based on the student and community feedback. Ultimately, this project reinforced something that I've learned repeatedly through my work in aging and design, and it's that when we create opportunities for people to truly know one another, many of the stereotypes and assumptions that separate generations begin to disappear. Thank you so much.